I'll never forget when I first laid eyes on the Opera House. I was on vacation with Erica, my wife. We had gone to Acadia and we wanted to find a more remote, more relaxing place in Maine to be, and we discovered Deer Isle. We drove over that bridge. So we made, I don't know, a left turn, a right turn, and there in front of us was this dilapidated mess, this beautiful dilapidated mess that was boarded up, and it said for sale. And it was clearly an old vaudeville opera house, and it was right there in front of the water, in front of the lobster port. And I said to Erica, wow, somebody should turn this into an art center. But the next thing I knew, and the thing that ended up introducing me to you, Linda, and to you, Judith, and to the Opera House, was I saw a little notice in the Island Advantage newspaper that said that the Opera House was bought and that a group was putting together plans for an art center. And so I called that number. And that's really what led me to you. I know I have a really clear memory of those first conversations that we had. And, you know, at the time I was editing a magazine, I was writing about jazz for the Village Voice and interviewing musicians, but I certainly wasn't looking to be a producer and to book concerts in any way. I remember talking to the two of you and Judith really talking about improvisation. Linda, I remember you talking so much about community and this community that you were building. And I remember that the two of you were kind of confirming all these suspicions I had about the island, that there was a lot of creativity in these hills and in these woods and in these coves. And that was really exciting to me. So, you know, I felt like we were having a jazz festival, or we were mounting a jazz festival, creating a jazz festival. We were birthing a jazz festival, but we were doing something that was much more interesting and had a lot more to do with how the sun sets on the island and what the wild improvisers that I interviewed do on the island of Manhattan. And I love that.
Judith and I both felt really strongly that, you know, improvisation as an art form is how we kind of best live our lives. So it became very tied to our mission. You know, our mission that we created was to use the performing arts to foster and promote excellence in all the ways we perform our lives. Incite, art, create community.
I'm no jazz expert. I mean, I love jazz when I'm in the presence of it, but I'm not knowledgeable about it. But the whole business of letting an impulse emerge out of your body in some way, in relation to an instrument, in relation to another body, in relation to an impulse in your own body, is just one of the most compelling things to me about both theater and life.
From the start, I realized that there were jazz fans tucked away in the hills of Deer Isle and people who really believed in what we were doing. There were Stan and Sue Bergen, who were great supporters of the festival. There were Rich and Mary Howe, who continue to be great supporters of the festival. And there was Ron Watson, who ran a wonderful art gallery that I never failed to stop into when I came to the island. And I didn't realize just what a deep jazz fan and music aficionado he was. So Ron was someone who helped us at the start and worked with us to curate the jazz festival and to think about what it really should be. And that relationship has sustained. In recent years, Ron has hosted very successful series of yet more intimate performances right in his gallery. And so there's been this great flowering of a jazz community and almost a little mini circuit of jazz musicians who are coming to this island. And Ron remains a friend of the festival. In my experience with being around great musicians, interviewing great musicians, I know that they're inspired and they seem to respond to places and to histories. One thing you cannot imitate is good natural sound. So I thought, wow, musicians I know, if they arrive at this place, they hear beautiful sounds, they'll know without us telling them that there's this history in this place. This place just drips with history. Something's gonna happen. And then, of course, there's Great Lobster. And it did happen. And I remember even just that very first year, we had Dewey Redman, a wonderful saxophonist who, among others, played with Ornette Coleman and who was near the end of his life and his career. And the very first time I heard the sound of his horn during a sound check in that place, without the mics even being turned on, I knew we were onto something. And we were. I remember Jason Moran, a great pianist, who came to our festival in one of its first years as a somewhat unknown pianist playing with saxophonist Greg Osby, and then returned maybe a decade or more later as an established star, MacArthur grantee, playing in duet with a giant of jazz, the saxophonist Charles Lloyd. But the first time Jason played at our festival, I remember one of his thank yous from the stage was to Stan Bergen, who lent him dress socks that he'd forgotten to pack. And he rolled up his pant leg and showed the audience these dress socks, and only in Deer Isle.
You know, the Bergens were so gracious with their home and their space and their groceries. As a young artist, you care about who's feeding you, you know? And also, yes, I think maybe it was also another thing I learned was, if you're on the road, never be afraid to ask somebody for some wardrobe. So asking Stan for some dress socks because I did not have any somehow, This is classic, young musician stuff on the road. There's a thing about jazz festival ecology is around the world there are small festivals in small towns, many of them, 3 hours away from Munich, 2 hours away from Barcelona. You're often kind of finding these small communities that cherish the music, and they cherish something beyond really, what the music is and who the artists are, as much as they cherish really the coming together moment. But I, had been stunned by the remoteness of it all, and stunned that there was a community of hardcore listeners, there in the audience.
Even just that first year or two, I saw some of the artists on the island there. Some of them had their sketchbooks out and they're drawing, and they're, drawing in real time to the music, responding to it.
And you can tell as a performer, you can tell when people are listening hard. It's a different quality of silence that's in the room when people are, and it's not even holding their breath. I don't want my audience to hold their breath. I need them to breathe. But, there's a kind of, leaning in isn't even the right word. It's I like to turn my ear when I want to hear something, trying to get my ear closer to the sound. And I felt like that's what the audience was doing in that space. It's not cavernous, but you hear this, this tilt, much like a stage has a rake, the audience has a rake, leaning in to listen. And, when you get to feed that as a musician, it's gratifying.
One of the things that I've loved about this experience is I can bring all of my passions about music and about culture more broadly and about community to the island and share them with all these people I've gotten to know year by year. And for a while, that passion was focused on New Orleans. So I knew that if I brought some New Orleans musicians to the island, it would both make for great concerts, but for some kind of deep experience. And these musicians at that time, 2007, 2008, they had a story to tell that was really important. So we brought a great saxophonist, Donald Harrison, to the island. We brought the Hot 8 Brass Band, one of a new generation of brass bands that were blending older tradition with elements of funk and hip hop and rap. I'll never forget, we had a second line parade on down Main Street and on the Lobster Dock. And it was a beautiful thing. You had this brass band leading it. It was the only second line parade. I've been to hundreds of second line parades. I've never seen a bassoon in a second line parade. There was Stan Bergen in a top hat leading the charge. There was Judith Jerome in a dress closely associated with the baby doll tradition of New Orleans, which is very important to that culture as well. But we had other aspects of this too. We had the Hot 8 Brass Band gave a clinic and a workshop, and musicians came, they wanted to learn certain things, these 3-horn harmonies, these certain rhythms that make people move down a street a certain way. But they also got to really learn firsthand from these musicians. This is where we come from. This is what happened to us. This is what this culture means to us. This is how much the water around us affects our lives. And these are things, these are sophisticated young students that were with us, and they were able to soak that up too and make connections to their lives.
One of the things that was so good about that was your depth of engagement with New Orleans. And so what you brought to it, including a sustained series of years of New Orleans musicians and their stories.
One of the through lines of my own work and the realities that I wanted to bring to bear that I think we did really well in the festival was the multicultural reality of whatever we call jazz, which is the multicultural reality of whatever we call this country and whatever we call our lives. And so to me, it was really valuable that we had Randy Weston perform first solo, but then in duet with Xiao-Fen, a master of the Chinese pipa instrument, which was no stunt. The two of them had actually done some research together about shared roots of their music. And that was the beginning of what would turn out to be a long collaboration.
One of the highlights was on the duet piece we composed together. That was the idea of behind this composition was the influence that Africa had on early Chinese civilization. And also, so while during the DIO festival, we performed this piece together. And that was one of my memorable concert always. With our concert, with especially when we perform with the three girls, women, Asian trio, and so we make all weird sound, because the Yumiko Tanaka, she performed Samishin, she put on the table a lot of weird stuff, that was like just whatever, what kind of song we can grab, we just play, and the audience is amazing. They're just so appreciative and also so support. And then after concert, really talk to you. Just amazing. Feel welcomed. Feels like a family for me.
I went to the first year when Jason Moran played. And that the place was just packed, and there was such a great spirit to it. And I thought, wow, why don't we make use of it? Like Haystack as a resource, we could have, it'd be cool to have like Jason Moran as a visiting artist, and then he could be at the Opera House later. And that was the genesis of the thought. I approached Linda and Judith with that, and we began to work on how it could work best.
And Xiao-Fen also did one of the beautiful 2-week residencies that we used to have one artist do each year at the Haystack School. And she created an original opera with these visual artists and taught them not just some of the Chinese traditions that she grew up learning about music, but also some of the Chinese traditions she had learned about the calligraphy and art that is associated with that music.
People's their study handcraft, and they're also music fan. Also, I remember Stuart's son also plays guitar, and so we always have like a groups like 5-6 people after their class. We just gathering together. Also, we grab all kind of stuff from the workshop, can make any kind of song. We just play, singing, and I teach them, I taught them the Chinese folk tones, phrases, just to teach them. And they're so into it, and so, just everyone just so, oh God, it just one of the best experience work with them.
I always wanted people at Haystack to first of all know that there were other things in the community of Deer Isle and Maine. It wasn't like they just came to the end of the earth and nothing ever existed, that there was a vibrant life here, for one. And then also to have people be involved with other art forms. So if you're working in clay, well, you're improvising in some way. So how do you improvise? What's a jazz improvisation like? I mean, some people who came to the workshops at Haystack were people who love jazz, and they maybe even came because they wanted to be at that session because of the jazz and because of what the Opera House is doing. But other people, it just was, they were there and it was happening and they came to it a different way. To me, that juncture where you're bringing together people who don't know what they might have in common and what happens is, always exciting. And visiting artists and jazz musicians at Haystack were definitely like that. That was it. That was really at the heart of it.
One of the things we learned early on is that Maine in general has kind of a great tradition of high school jazz festivals and competitions, and the Blue Hill Peninsula in particular was kind of an award-winning area for those jazz combos, those high school jazz combos. And Steve Orlovsky, who not enough can be said about Mr. O, who's been still running a program there 36, 7, 8 years later. And so it seemed to kind of, without question, that when we started to try and incorporate, as we do with all of our productions here, the local element, that we would turn to GSA, George Stevens Academy in Blue Hill, and Steve Orlovsky's students, and built what I think is just a fabulous partnership where every year his combo would open the festival.
Among the first time I performed on the stage it was impactful for me because it was the year that Bill McHenry had been hired not only to open but to rehearse a band of young people, and those kids who were older than me at the time by about 4 years, including my brother, were in that band with Bill, and I would go to the rehearsals, as the young kid, the kid brother who loved this music, and Bill invited me up to play on a song as a result of my being there so much, and I think that was maybe the first time I was on that stage, and yeah, I mean a number of impacts right there, like. Bill McHenry was a mentor. He was someone who grew up in my town and was already a successful jazz musician in New York, which is what at the time I wanted to be. So I was getting to play with him. I was getting to play with my brother's friends who were my mentors in a different way, some of whom are still my close, musical collaborators. And I was getting to play like on, in this beautiful old wooden stage that, was like some of the first times that I felt sort of being taken seriously on a stage was at the Opera House. In a lot of ways, the Opera House has kind of provided me with these initial experiences that I've then been able to build upon. And yeah, last year would have been 2019. I played, I opened the festival with a friend of mine playing duo. I mean, it's astonishingly beautiful, nice old theater, and yeah, I do hope to continue to work there. Improvisation can be looked at as an ethos, and I went on to study it, you know, so of course it's going to have an effect on my life, but I do see it as this larger way of conducting yourself in the world that I can see it as a radical thing in terms of it is kind of anti a lot of organizational structures that we have, and it is kind of anti head and body, let alone heart compartmentalization, and it's kind of about intuition, and an aspect of it has this sort of return to a degree of instinct that, you know, somehow leads in the area, in the Blue Hill Peninsula, Deer Isle area, also to this integration with the environment, you know, which is so exciting, gorgeous, like coastal, rocky environment, and pretty energetic and pretty powerful. My experience has been too that there's like this degree of improvisation between the human communities and like kind of their surrounding environment in terms of just letting the environment into their lives and dictate to their actions to a certain extent, and of course like their art. So yeah, it's this broad sweeping aspect, you know, of my life and a lot of people in that community's lives.
So that improvisational part, that listening and response part, that is what Charles Lloyd and Dewey Redman and almost every one of the jazz artists who played here said to me at some point. It's all about listening. It's all about responding. That's what life is about. We sometimes forget the first part. We just kind of dive into the second part. But I think that that's, to me, really where the founding of the Jazz Festival came so early in our history in the summer of 2001 and been going strong ever since.
One of the things that I want to continue to explore more deeply, and I don't know what that means, is this connection about what does improvisation mean? So I'm looking forward to digging more deeply into, well, what does that impulse mean? And we have these cliches about improvisation as something that stands in opposition to composition. But the truth is, just as our reality is multicultural, our reality of music and of arts is complicated, and improvisation and composition and form and spontaneous creation are really one. I've seen that in other events that I've gone to at the Opera House, but I definitely feel it when we present our jazz festival there. So I'm looking forward to, what does that really mean to the musicians? What does that really mean to the people on the island? How can we express that more deeply in this moment that we're all going to have soon, where we can again be sitting in the music together instead of on a screen the way I'm unfortunately speaking right now. So I'm really looking forward to that, and let's do it.